Hi, I'm Elena. My husband used to hold my hand during chemo sessions and whisper, "We're in this fight together forever." Turns out what he really meant was, "I'm staying just long enough to make sure you don't die before I can clean out everything." He filed for divorce while I was unconscious from surgery, moved his girlfriend into our house, and told everyone I was too sick to make rational decisions. He even convinced my own doctors to limit my visitors, claiming I needed stress-free recovery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But while he was busy playing the grieving husband and positioning himself to inherit everything, he forgot one crucial detail. I wasn't just his wife. I was the silent majority shareholder of his family's $200 million construction empire, a stake I'd earned through a prenup clause he never bothered to read. Now he's lost everything: the company, the house, his reputation, and yes, even that girlfriend who suddenly found him a lot less attractive when the money disappeared. But here's what still keeps me awake during these long recovery nights. Was his love ever real? Or was I just a convenient business acquisition he planned to liquidate once I became inconvenient? Before we dive into how I dismantled his entire world from a hospital bed, let me know. What time are you watching this, and where are you from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and trust me, I have plenty of time these days. The thing about being betrayed when you're already fighting for your life is that it doesn't just break your heart. It crystallizes something inside you. Like carbon under pressure becoming diamond, hard, clear, and capable of cutting through anything. Let me paint you the picture of how this all started. 6 months ago, I was Elena Morrison Blackwell, living what everyone thought was a fairy tale, life in Millfield Heights, just outside Portland. Married to Marcus Blackwell, whose family had built Blackwell Construction from a single truck operation into the Pacific Northwest's premier commercial development company. We had the sprawling Tudor-style home, the matching Range Rovers, the charity galas, the perfect couple photos that made everyone's social media feeds look boring by comparison. But fairy tales don't usually include stage 3 ovarian cancer, diagnoses delivered on a Tuesday morning that changes everything. Marcus seemed like the perfect husband during those first few weeks. He rearranged his entire schedule to drive me to appointments. He held my hand during the genetic counseling sessions. He even learned to tie my headscarves when the chemo started stealing my hair. His Instagram posts during that time read like, "Love letters. My warrior queen, stronger than any storm." Every day with Elena is a gift I'll never take for granted. In sickness and in health means something when you really love someone. The comments poured in. Relationship goals. You, too, are so inspiring. Marcus, you're the kind of husband every woman dreams of. If only they knew what he was really dreaming of. See, what Marcus didn't understand, what he never bothered to understand, was that our prenup wasn't the standard, "What's yours is yours, what's mine is mine," document most wealthy families use. When old Thomas Blackwell, Marcus's grandfather, had insisted on the prenup before our wedding, he'd included a very specific clause that Marcus had waved off as just old-fashioned family protection nonsense. The clause was simple. In the event of the marriage lasting more than 5 years, the spouse would receive a 51% controlling interest in Blackwell Construction, to be activated upon the death or incapacitation of the current family head. Thomas had lost his first wife to cancer and had seen too many family businesses destroyed by inheritance battles. He wanted to make sure that any woman who proved her commitment to the Blackwell name would have the power to protect the company's legacy. Marcus had laughed about it during our engagement. "Grandfather's just being dramatic. That'll never matter anyway. We're going to be together forever, right?" He'd signed the documents without even reading the fine print, too focused on making sure I couldn't take his trust fund if things went south. What he didn't realize was that Thomas Blackwell had died 3 months before my diagnosis, making me the activation trigger for that clause. What he also didn't realize was that I'd spent 8 years working alongside his family, learning every aspect of their business, earning Thomas's respect and, eventually, his absolute trust in my judgment. The old man had pulled me aside at our 5th wedding anniversary party just 2 months before he passed. "Elena," he'd said, his weathered hands gripping mine, "you've got more business sense in your little finger than Marcus has in his whole body. If anything ever happens to me, and if Marcus ever shows his true colors, you remember that blood isn't always thicker than water. Sometimes it's just stickier." I'd thought it was just an old man's cryptic wisdom at the time. Now I understood it was a warning. The morning I woke up from my hysterectomy surgery, groggy and disoriented, I reached for Marcus's hand like I had for months, but my fingers found empty air. The chair beside my bed was vacant, and had been for hours, according to the nurse who came to check my vitals. "Where's my husband?" I asked, my voice still thick from anesthesia. The nurse's expression shifted uncomfortably. He said he had some urgent business to handle. Something about papers that needed to be filed today." Papers. On the day of my surgery, when I was supposed to be his only priority, that's when I knew. Not suspected, knew. Marcus hadn't disappeared to handle business. He'd disappeared to handle the business of me. And lying there in that hospital bed, IV drip steady. In my arm, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the tragic wife who got discarded when she became inconvenient. I was going to be the woman who reminded Marcus Blackwell exactly who he'd married. He thought he was playing chess while I was too weak to move. What he didn't realize was that I'd been playing a completely different game all along. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morphine made everything feel like I was watching my life through frosted glass. Days blended into nights, punctuated only by the rhythm of nurses checking vitals and the steady beep of machines that had become my new soundtrack. But even through the haze of medication, I started noticing things that didn't quite fit the narrative Marcus was spinning for everyone else. It began with small inconsistencies. Marcus would arrive at the hospital precisely at 2 p.m. Every day stay for exactly 90 minutes, then leave citing urgent meetings. His visits followed a pattern so rigid it felt choreographed. He'd bring flowers, always the same white roses from the hospital gift shop, never my favorite sunflowers from our garden. He'd ask about my pain levels, nod sympathetically at my responses, then spend most of the visit scrolling through his phone while maintaining just enough conversation to seem attentive. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" he'd ask, but his eyes never left the screen. "Better," I'd whisper, because that's what you're supposed to say in hospitals. "The nausea is improving." "That's great. Really great." Still scrolling. "Listen, I might need to cut today short. The Peterson project is heating up and you know how demanding those clients can be." I did know. I'd been the one to land the Peterson account 3 years ago, back when I was still actively involved in Blackwell Construction's business development. Back when Marcus actually listened to my ideas instead of dismissing them as Elena's little projects. The thing that struck me most wasn't what Marcus was doing. It was what he wasn't doing. He never brought my laptop, despite my repeated requests to check emails. He never mentioned friends asking about me, though I knew dozens of people who would be concerned. He never updated me on the company, even though I'd been Thomas's unofficial right hand for the last 2 years of his life. Most telling of all, he never stayed past 3:30 p.m. Not once. Even on the days when I was clearly struggling, when the chemo side effects left me nauseous and disoriented, Marcus maintained his schedule with military precision. "I hate leaving you," he'd say, checking his watch. "But you know how Dad gets when the quarterly numbers aren't perfect." Except Thomas Blackwell had been dead for 3 months. Marcus's father, Richard, lived in Palm Springs and hadn't been involved in day-to-day operations for over a decade. There were no quarterly reviews that couldn't wait. No urgent meetings that couldn't be rescheduled for a man whose wife was fighting cancer. The hospital staff began to notice too. My primary nurse, Janet, had been working oncology for 15 years. She'd seen every kind of family dynamic that serious illness could produce. One afternoon, as she was adjusting my IV, she made a comment that cut through my medication fog like a blade. "Your husband's very punctual," she said carefully, not meeting my eyes as she worked. "What do you mean?" Janet paused, choosing her words with the diplomatic precision of someone who'd learned not to interfere in family matters. In my experience, when someone's really worried about their spouse, they tend to be a little more flexible with their schedules. She didn't need to say more. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from someone else gave weight to the doubt that had been growing in my chest like a tumor of its own. The next day, I decided to test my theory. When Marcus arrived at his usual 2 p.m., I told him I'd been having severe anxiety attacks and asked if he could stay a little longer. "Of course," he said immediately, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How much longer were you thinking?" "Maybe until after dinner? The evenings are the hardest?" His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "You know what? Let me see if I can move some things around." He stepped into the hallway to take a call, and I could hear fragments of his conversation through the partially open door. "Can't stay that long. She's being really needy today." I know, but what am I supposed to do? Maybe you could handle it without me this once." When he returned, his smile was perfectly in place. "Good news. I can stay until 5. Will that help?" I nodded weakly, but something cold had settled in my stomach. Needy. That's how he'd described his wife with cancer asking for a few extra hours of companionship. During those extra hours, Marcus's performance became even more obvious. He made a show of reading to me from magazines, but I caught him checking his phone every few minutes. When I dozed off, I'd wake to find him typing furiously, always putting the phone away quickly when he noticed I was awake. Around 4:30, his phone rang. He answered it immediately, stepping outside again. This time, his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. Warm, intimate, almost flirtatious. "I miss you too. I know it's hard. Just a little longer, okay? She's sleeping most of the time anyway, tomorrow night for sure." My blood pressure monitor started beeping as my heart rate spiked. A different nurse came in to check on me, but I waved her away, pretending to be asleep. When Marcus returned, he was all solicitous concern. "Everything okay?" I saw the nurse come in. "Just a blood pressure spike," I mumbled. "Probably the medication." He nodded absently, already checking his watch. At exactly 5 p.m., he kissed my forehead and left, citing traffic concerns. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the holes in the acoustic panels to distract myself from the growing certainty that my marriage was dissolving while my body was being rebuilt. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was fighting to save my life while my husband was apparently planning to start a new one. But the most unsettling realization wasn't about Marcus's behavior. It was about my own reaction to it. Instead of heartbreak, I felt a familiar sensation rising in my chest, the same focused calm I'd experienced during hostile business negotiations, the same strategic clarity that had helped me turn around 3 failing Blackwell construction projects. I wasn't devastated. I was calculating. By morning, I'd made a decision. If Marcus thought he was going to quietly manage my decline while positioning himself for maximum advantage, he was about to learn that Elena Morrison Blackwell wasn't nearly as helpless as she appeared. Cancer might have weakened my body, but it had sharpened something else entirely. It was time to find out exactly what my husband was doing during all those hours he wasn't spending with his dying wife. And more importantly, it was time to remember exactly what kind of power I'd been accumulating while he'd been taking me for granted. The hunt was about to begin. The discovery came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, when the hospital corridors were dimmed and most patients were deep in medicated sleep. I'd been awake for hours, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The morphine button lay untouched beside my hand. I needed clarity more than comfort. I reached for my phone to check messages, something I'd been doing less frequently as the treatments progressed. What I found made my blood run colder than any chemotherapy drug they'd ever pumped into my veins. My phone had been logged out of everything: email, banking apps, social media, cloud storage, all. Requiring fresh passwords I supposedly couldn't remember. But I remembered everything. What I was looking at was a systematic digital lockout, professionally executed and carefully timed. My hands shook as I navigated to our joint banking app. Access denied. Password changed 6 days ago, the same day I'd been admitted for my surgery. I tried our investment accounts. Same thing. The mortgage portal, locked out. Even our Netflix account, for God's sake, showed a password change I'd never authorized. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about the old iPhone I kept in my hospital bag, the one I used exclusively for work communications, with Blackwell Construction. It was still logged into everything that mattered. I opened the work email first, my heart hammering against my ribs. The most recent emails painted a picture that made my diagnosis seem like a minor inconvenience. By comparison, there were messages from Marcus to the company's legal team, dated 3 days ago, with the subject line, "Succession Planning, Urgent." I clicked it open and read words that felt like a physical blow. Given Elena's declining health situation and the uncertainty of her recovery timeline, we need to expedite the transition of her advisory role. As discussed, we'll need to establish a medical power of attorney arrangement and begin the process of transferring her business responsibilities to ensure continuity. Please prepare the necessary documentation for her signature. Time is of the essence. Medical power of attorney. To establish his control over my healthcare decisions and business responsibilities, meaning my stake in the company that he didn't even know I had, but it got worse. The next email was from their family. Attorney David Chen sent the morning of my surgery. Marcus, I've reviewed the documents you requested. I must advise caution regarding the timing of these filings. Elena's current medical state could raise questions about her capacity to consent to such significant changes. I recommend waiting until she's more stable before proceeding with the divorce filing and asset protection measures. Divorce filing, asset protection measures. The word swam before my eyes as the full scope of his plan crystallized. He wasn't just leaving me while I was fighting cancer. He was orchestrating a complete financial takeover under the guise of helping me manage my affairs during my illness. The Caring Husband Act wasn't just for show. It was strategic positioning to establish his narrative of being the responsible party managing an incompetent spouse's affairs. My finger scrolled to the next email. This one from Marcus to someone named Vivian Torres. The timestamp showed it was sent at 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes after his daily hospital visit ended. Stayed later today, but she's mostly sleeping. Lawyers think we can expedite everything if we move while she's still in treatment. Once the divorce is final and the medical proxy is in place, we can finally stop pretending. I'm so tired of this performance. Can't wait to have you in our bed instead of sneaking around. Our bed. The bed I'd been sharing with him for 8 years. The bed I'd been recovering in after chemotherapy sessions. The bed where he'd held me when I cried about losing my hair. He was planning to install his girlfriend in our home while I was still fighting for my life. I scrolled further back in the chain, finding emails that dated to just weeks after my diagnosis. He'd been planning this almost from the moment the doctor said cancer. While I was researching treatment options and preparing for the fight of my life, Marcus was researching divorce lawyers and asset protection strategies. One message stood out, sent to his brother Kevin. She's so focused on the medical stuff, she's not paying attention to anything else. Perfect timing to restructure everything. By the time she recovers, if she recovers, it'll all be done. if she recovers. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical slap. He wasn't just planning for our divorce, he was hedging his bets on my survival. But then I found the email that changed everything. It was from Marcus to David Chen, sent just yesterday, Elena. Keeps asking about company business. She's getting suspicious about why I won't bring her laptop. How do we handle the Blackwell construction stuff? I need to make sure she can't interfere with operations while she's sick. David's response was immediate and devastating. Marcus, I need to remind you that Elena has significant legal protections regarding her involvement with the company. Given her marital status and the terms of your prenuptial agreement, any attempt to exclude her from business decisions could have serious legal ramifications. I strongly advise against any action that could be construed as financial abuse or exploitation of her medical condition. I read that exchange 3 times before the full implications sank in. David Chen knew about the prenup clause. He knew about my controlling interest, and he was trying to warn Marcus away from a legal disaster he was blindly walking into. Marcus's response was both arrogant and telling. She's been out of commission for months. She doesn't understand the business side anyway. She just handled marketing and client relations. I've been running everything fine without her input. Marketing and client relations. That's what he thought I'd been doing for the past 8 years. He had no idea that I'd been learning every aspect of the business from Thomas Blackwell himself. No idea that I understood the company's financial structure better than he did. No idea that I held the legal authority to make decisions he couldn't override. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, processing what I'd discovered. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me and planning a divorce. He was attempting to orchestrate a complete personal and financial destruction, counting on my illness to make me compliant and unaware. But he'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. He'd assumed that cancer would make me weak and passive. Instead, it had stripped away everything non-essential, leaving only the core of who I was, and who I was a woman who'd been trained by one of the most ruthless businessmen in the Pacific Northwest. Thomas Blackwell hadn't just given me controlling interest in his company. He'd spent years teaching me how to use it. I picked up my phone again and opened a secure messaging app, typing a message to someone I hadn't contacted in months. Claire, it's Elena. I need your help. Can you come to Millfield General tomorrow? And bring everything you have on hostile takeover defense strategies. Claire Rodriguez had been my roommate at Stanford Business School and was now a partner at one of Seattle's most aggressive corporate law firms. If anyone could help me navigate what was about to become a very complicated war, it was her. As I hit send, I felt something shift inside me, a familiar sensation from my days negotiating million-dollar deals. The thrill of a challenge, the clarity of purpose, the cold satisfaction of holding cards your opponent doesn't know you have. Marcus thought he was playing a game against a sick, distracted woman. He was about to discover he'd been playing against a strategist who'd been quietly preparing for this moment her entire adult life. The fight was about to begin, and I had no intention of losing. Claire Rodriguez arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 large coffee cups and a leather briefcase that had seen more hostile takeovers than most corporate boardrooms. She looked exactly like she had in business school. Sharp blazer, no-nonsense expression, and the kind of confident stride that made opposing counsel nervous. "You look like hell," she said, setting one coffee on my bedside table. "But your email last night was the most coherent thing I've read in months. Talk to me." I handed her my work phone, already queued up to the email chain that had shattered my world 12 hours earlier. Claire read in silence, her expression growing darker with each message. When she finished, she set the phone down and pulled out a legal pad. "Elena, I need you to understand something. What Marcus is attempting isn't just divorce fraud. It's financial elder abuse adapted for medical incapacitation. In Oregon, what he's doing could result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties." She opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Before we go further, I need to verify something. You mentioned a prenup clause about company control. Do you have a copy of the actual document? I pointed to my purse in the closet. There's a safety deposit box key in the side pocket. Box 247 at First National downtown. Everything's in there. The prenup, Thomas's will, the company and corporation documents, all of it. Claire nodded. I'll retrieve those documents today. But first, we need to establish exactly what assets we're protecting and what Marcus has already compromised. She spent the next hour taking detailed notes as I walked her through every account, every investment, every piece of property that Marcus might be trying to claim or control. The list was longer than I'd realized. 8 years of marriage. To a construction dynasty, heir had accumulated more wealth than I'd paid attention to while healthy. Here's what we're going to do, Claire said, closing her notepad. We're going to conduct a full forensic audit of your digital and financial footprint. Then we're going to document every action Marcus has taken that could constitute fraud or abuse. And we're going to do it all while maintaining the appearance that you're too sick to be involved in business matters. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Sam, it's Claire. I need a favor. Yes, the kind that requires NDAs and off the books. Work? Perfect. Millfield General, room 314, today. Within 3 hours, my hospital room had been transformed into a covert operations center. Sam Reeves, a forensic accountant who specialized in marital fraud cases, had set up his laptop on the window ledge and was systematically tracing every financial move Marcus had made in the past 6 months. Your husband's been busy, Sam said, not looking up from his screen. He's moved approximately $850,000 from joint accounts into personal holdings. The transfers were small enough to avoid automatic reporting, but frequent enough to drain the account systematically. Claire was on her phone with the bank, using her attorney credentials to freeze accounts and obtain transaction records. Elena, I need you to listen carefully. I'm implementing immediate protective measures, but we need to move fast. How's your relationship with the Blackwell Construction Board members? I thought about the monthly meetings I'd attended with Thomas, the strategy sessions, the personnel decisions I'd been part of. Strong with most of them. Thomas made sure I was involved in major decisions. Why? Because Marcus has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. According to the company secretary, it's to address leadership continuity during Elena's extended medical absence. The implications hit me immediately. He wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was attempting to have me declared unfit for business decisions and install himself as sole decision-maker for the company. Sam looked up from his laptop. There's more. He's been in contact with a private investigator for the past month, someone named Jake Morrison. The PI has been documenting Elena's medical appointments, her hospital stays, her medication schedules. They're building a case for mental incompetence. I felt the blood drain from my face. They're going to argue that the cancer treatment has affected my judgment. It's a common tactic, Claire said grimly. Chemotherapy brain is a real condition, and unscrupulous lawyers use it to argue diminished capacity. Combined with your hospital stays and medication records, they could potentially challenge any business or financial decisions you make. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Feeling better today? I might stop by later if I can break away. From work. Love you. I showed the message to Claire, who screenshotted immediately. Perfect. We're going to document every lie, every fake sentiment, every manipulation. When this goes to court, we'll have a timeline of his deception. But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Claire, what if we let him call the board meeting? She looked up sharply. Elena, if he gets the board to declare you incompetent, you could lose everything. Or, I said slowly, I could show up and remind them exactly who they're dealing with. Sam. Stop typing. You're talking about walking into what amounts to an ambush while you're recovering from major surgery. I'm talking about ending this before it begins. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in months. Margaret, it's Elena. Yes, I know I've been out of touch. I need a favor. Can you arrange for me to attend tomorrow's board meeting? I'll need transportation and… Yes, I understand it's unusual, but it's important. Margaret Sinclair had been Thomas Blackwell's executive assistant for 20 years and was now the company's board secretary. If anyone could help me make a dramatic entrance, it was her. After I hung up, Claire was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Elena, you're planning to confront Marcus and the entire board while you're hooked to an IV and recovering from cancer surgery. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? I smiled for the first time in days. Claire, I've spent 8 years learning this business from Thomas Blackwell. He didn't just teach me about construction and development. He taught me about power, how to accumulate it, how to use it, and how to deploy it when people least expect it. I picked up the prenup document that Claire had retrieved from the safety deposit box. The clause about controlling interest was highlighted in Thomas's own handwriting with a note in the margin. For Elena, use wisely. Marcus thinks he's outmaneuvering a sick woman who can't fight back. Tomorrow he's going to discover that he's been playing chess with someone who's been planning this game for years. Sam packed up his laptop. I'll have the full financial analysis ready by morning. Every fraudulent transfer, every hidden asset, every manipulation documented and ready for court. Claire gathered her files. I'll have injunctions prepared to freeze all assets and prevent any further transfers. And Elena? I'll have an ambulance on standby in case you collapse during the meeting. After they left, I lay back against my pillows and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, Marcus would try to have me declared incompetent in front of the board of directors. Instead, he was going to watch me exercise the power he never knew I had. Thomas Blackwell had trained me for this moment. He'd given me the tools, the knowledge, and the legal authority to protect his legacy. Tomorrow, I was going to honor that trust and destroy the man who thought he could steal it all while I was too weak to fight back. The hunt was over. Tomorrow, the trap would spring. The transformation began at 5 a.m., 3 hours before I was supposed to face the Blackwell Construction Board of Directors. I'd been awake since 3, not from pain or medication side effects, but from the electric clarity of someone who'd finally stopped running from a fight and decided to win it instead. Margaret Sinclair arrived first, carrying a garment bag and a makeup case that looked like it belonged to a Broadway costume department. She'd been Thomas Blackwell's right hand for 2 decades, and if anyone understood the theater of corporate power, it was her. Mr. Thomas always said that half of business is psychology, Margaret said, unzipping the garment bag. People make decisions about your competence before you even speak, based on how you present yourself. Inside the bag was a charcoal gray power suit, perfectly tailored, with a silk blouse the color of fresh snow. The kind of outfit that commanded attention, in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. How did you know my size? I asked, running my fingers over the fabric. Margaret smiled. Honey, I've been ordering your Christmas gifts from Mr. Marcus for 8 years. He never paid attention to what size he was buying, so I always had to figure it out myself. While Margaret helped me dress, working carefully around my IV lines and surgical sites, Claire arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a tablet loaded with financial data. She looked like she hadn't slept, which probably meant she'd spent the night preparing for legal warfare. The forensic analysis is complete, Claire said, setting up her tablet on the hospital table. Sam found evidence of systematic financial fraud going back 7 months. Marcus has been siphoning money since before your diagnosis, which means this wasn't just opportunistic. It was premeditated. She showed me a spreadsheet that made my stomach clench. Regular transfers to accounts I'd never seen. Payments to the private investigator who'd been documenting my medical condition. Even a $50,000 payment to something called VT Consulting, which we'd discovered was Vivian Torres, his girlfriend, who was apparently being paid as a business consultant while sleeping with my husband. There's more, Claire continued. I had Sam dig into the company's recent financial activity. Marcus has been using his position to authorize consulting contracts and service agreements that all trace back to shell companies he controls. He's been embezzling from Blackwell Construction while planning to frame you as incompetent. The makeup. Artist Margaret had called arrived next. A woman named Rosa who specialized in what she diplomatically called challenging circumstances. She took one look at me and nodded professionally. Cancer treatment, recent surgery, need to look powerful in a boardroom, Rosa said matter-of-factly. I've done this before, sweetie. We're going to make you look like the CEO you are. As Rosa worked, carefully concealing the effects of chemotherapy and surgery, with techniques that would make a Hollywood makeup artist jealous, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just physically, but mentally. The woman in the mirror was starting to look less like a cancer patient and more like the person who'd helped grow Blackwell Construction's revenue by 40% over the past 3 years. Elena, Claire said, I need to prepare you for what's going to happen in that boardroom. Marcus is going to present evidence that you're mentally compromised by your medical treatment. He has documentation of medication schedules, testimony from medical staff about your condition, even photos from the private investigator showing you looking disoriented during treatment. I tested my voice, which had grown stronger as the morning progressed. What he doesn't have is any understanding of what I've been doing for this company or what legal authority I actually possess. Claire nodded. That's our advantage. But Elena, you need to understand. If this goes wrong, if the board sides with Marcus, you could lose everything. The company, your financial assets, even your medical decision-making authority. And if I do nothing, you lose everything anyway, just more slowly. Margaret finished adjusting my suit jacket and stepped back to assess her work. You look like Mr. Thomas's protege. He'd be proud. At 8:30 a.m., a medical transport van arrived at the hospital. Not an ambulance, that would look too dramatic. But a professional medical vehicle that could transport me safely while maintaining the IV medications I still needed. Claire had arranged everything, including a portable oxygen tank and a registered nurse named David who would stay close during the meeting. As we drove through downtown Millfield, I reviewed the documents that would change everything. The prenuptial agreement with Thomas's handwritten notes in the margins, the corporate bylaws that clearly outlined decision-making authority, the medical records that showed my cognitive function had never been impaired despite the chemotherapy, but most importantly, I reviewed the folder that Margaret had quietly prepared. Every major business decision I'd influenced over the past 3 years, every client relationship I'd managed, every strategic initiative I'd proposed that had increased company profits. Marcus might see me as a social accessory who'd been playing at business involvement, but the numbers told a very different story. Elena, Claire said as we pulled into the Blackwell Construction parking garage, once we walk into that building, everything changes. You're not going to be Elena the cancer patient anymore. You're going to be Elena Morrison Blackwell, majority shareholder and strategic decision maker. Are you ready for that? I looked at my reflection in the van's window. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the person who'd discovered her husband's betrayal 3 days ago. This woman looked like someone who'd spent years learning how to navigate corporate power struggles. Someone who'd been trained by Thomas Blackwell himself. I've been ready for 8 years, I said. I just didn't know it yet. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt like ascending to a different world. Each floor that passed took me further from the hospital bed where I'd been playing the role of helpless victim and closer to the boardroom where I was about to reclaim everything Marcus thought he could steal. Margaret met us at the elevator, her expression carefully neutral. The board members are all here, she said quietly. Mr. Marcus arrived early and has been presenting his case for the past 30 minutes. They're concerned about the company's leadership stability. Good, I said, straightening my jacket. Concern is the right response, just not about what they think. Claire checked her watch. It's 9:15. They're expecting you at 9:30. Are you sure you... Want to make an entrance rather than slipping in quietly? I thought about Thomas Blackwell, about the lessons he'd taught me during those long strategy sessions in his office, about how he'd always said that in business, timing wasn't just important, it was everything. Margaret, I said, please, inform the board that Mrs. Morrison Blackwell has arrived and would like to address the leadership concerns they've been discussing. As Margaret walked toward the boardroom, I felt the last pieces of my old life falling away. The woman who'd trusted Marcus, who'd believed in their partnership, who'd fought cancer while believing her husband was fighting alongside her, she was gone. The woman who remained had been forged in a hospital bed through betrayal and strategy. Mentored by a business legend and armed with legal authority, her own husband didn't know she possessed. Marcus had wanted to play games with a helpless victim. Instead, he was about to face an opponent who'd been preparing for this battle her entire adult life, taught by the best strategist in the Pacific Northwest and motivated by the kind of rage that only comes from betrayal at your most vulnerable moment. The boardroom doors opened, and it was time to remind everyone exactly who Elena Morrison Blackwell really was. The Blackwell construction boardroom fell silent the moment I walked through those mahogany doors. 8 men in expensive suits turned to stare at the woman they'd been discussing for the past hour. The woman Marcus had convinced them was too mentally compromised by cancer treatment to make rational business decisions. Marcus's face went white. Not pale, white, like someone had drained every drop of blood from his head in an instant. He was standing at the head of the conference table, mid-presentation, with a PowerPoint slide behind him titled, Medical Incapacity and Leadership. Transition. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Elena, he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. What are you doing here? You should be resting. I should be participating in a board meeting about my company, I replied calmly, walking to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. David, my nurse, helped me settle in while Claire positioned herself behind my chair with her briefcase full of ammunition. Board Chairman Robert Caldwell cleared his throat. Elena, we're so glad to see you looking well, but Marcus has raised some serious concerns about your ability to... To what, Robert? I interrupted, my voice carrying the same authority I'd learned from Thomas during countless strategy sessions. To think clearly, to make sound business decisions, to protect the interests of this company that I've helped grow by 40% over the past 3 years. I opened the folder Margaret had prepared and spread out the financial reports like playing cards. Let's talk about sound business decisions. Marcus, would you like to explain to the board why you've authorized $340,000 in consulting contracts to shell companies over the past 6 months? The color that had returned to Marcus's face drained away again. Around the table, board members leaned forward, suddenly very interested in documents they hadn't seen before. Elena, you're clearly confused by the medication, Marcus started. Sam Reeves is a forensic accountant, I said, nodding to Claire, who began distributing copies of the financial analysis. He specializes in corporate fraud. These are his findings regarding unauthorized transactions conducted under Marcus's authority while I was receiving medical treatment. Robert Caldwell put on his reading glasses and scanned the first page. His expression grew darker with each line. Marcus, what is VT Consulting? And why were they paid $50,000 for services that aren't specified in any board resolution? VT Consulting is Vivian Torres, I said before Marcus could answer. Marcus's girlfriend, the woman he's been supporting with company funds, while telling everyone his wife is too sick to manage her affairs. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Finally, he managed, Elena, you're having paranoid delusions. Am I? I pulled out my work phone and set it on the table. These are emails from your account to the company attorney, discussing divorce filings and asset protection measures. Sent from your company email while using company time. Would you like me to read them aloud? Board member James Mitchell, who'd been Thomas's closest friend, spoke up. Elena, Marcus told us you've been experiencing significant memory issues and confusion due to your treatment. He said you've been making irrational accusations. James, do I seem confused to you right now? I asked, meeting his eyes directly. Do I seem unable to understand complex financial information or make rational decisions about business operations? I stood up slowly, maintaining the IV line, but projecting strength. Let me remind everyone in this room of something. 3 years ago, when the Peterson Group was considering pulling their $50 million development contract, who flew to Denver and restructured the entire deal? Silence. When the city of Portland was threatening to revoke our permits for the waterfront project, who spent 6 months negotiating with the Planning Commission to keep us in compliance? More silence. When we were hemorrhaging money on the failed residential development in Beaverton, who identified the cost overruns and restructured the contractor relationships to salvage a $15 million project? Robert Caldwell removed his glasses. Elena, that was all you. That was all me, I confirmed. Working alongside Thomas Blackwell, learning every aspect of this business, contributing to every major strategic decision we've made for the past 8 years. And Marcus characterized this as, what did you call it? Marketing and client relations? Marcus finally found his voice. Elena, you're twisting everything. You've been out of touch with reality for months. The medical records clearly show that I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 4 months ago, I interrupted. They show that I underwent successful surgery and responded well to chemotherapy. They do not show any cognitive impairment, memory loss, or inability to make rational decisions. Claire stepped forward and placed another document on the table. This is a cognitive assessment performed by Dr. Sarah Kim, an independent neuropsychologist. 3 days ago. Elena's cognitive function tests at the 98th percentile. Her memory, reasoning, and decision-making abilities are completely unimpaired. I sat back down and looked directly at Marcus. What the medical records don't show is systematic financial fraud, embezzlement of company funds, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse disguised as medical incapacity. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. Marcus's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. There's something else this board needs to know, I continued, reaching for the final document in my folder. Marcus has been operating under the assumption that his authority in this company comes from his family name and his marriage to me. He's forgotten to read the legal documents that actually govern corporate control. I placed the prenuptial agreement on the table, open to the page with Thomas's handwritten notes. According to the terms of our prenuptial agreement, executed 8 years ago and witnessed by 3 board members in this room, upon the death of Thomas Blackwell, controlling interest in Blackwell Construction transfers to his chosen successor, Robert. Caldwell leaned forward. Elena, what are you saying? I'm saying that Thomas didn't leave the company to his grandson. He left it to the person he'd been training to run it. The person he trusted to protect his legacy and continue his vision. I pulled out the final document, Thomas's will, with the relevant section highlighted. Thomas Blackwell left 51% controlling interest in Blackwell Construction to Elena Morrison Blackwell, to take effect immediately upon his death or upon any attempt by family members to exclude her from company operations. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, James Mitchell spoke up. Elena, are you saying you've been the majority shareholder for 3 months? I'm saying I've been the majority shareholder since the day Thomas died, and I've been letting Marcus play CEO out of respect for family dynamics, and because I was dealing with a cancer diagnosis. But the moment he tried to have me declared incompetent and remove me from company decisions, the gloves came off. Marcus slumped into his chair like a deflated balloon. The man who'd walked into this meeting confident he was about to assume complete control of a $200 million company had just discovered he'd been a figurehead for months. The question now, I said, looking around the table at faces that showed varying degrees of shock, respect, and understanding, "is whether this board wants to continue working with someone who embezzles company funds and commits fraud against his own wife, or whether you'd prefer to work with the person Thomas Blackwell actually chose to lead his company." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the conference table. For a moment, I saw not the man who'd betrayed me, but the person I'd once loved, realizing that his greed had cost him everything. "The floor is yours, gentlemen," I said. "What's it going to be?" The vote wasn't even close. Robert Caldwell didn't need to call for discussion or deliberation. One by one, each board member looked from the evidence spread across the conference table to Marcus slumped in his chair, then to me sitting calmly at the opposite end, IV line still attached, but radiating, the kind of quiet authority that can't be faked. All in favor of accepting Elena Morrison Blackwell as majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Blackwell Construction. Robert's voice carried the weight of finality. 8 hands rose without hesitation. Marcus didn't even attempt to vote. "Motion carries unanimously," Robert announced. "Elena, the company is officially under your control." But Marcus wasn't finished. As the reality of his situation sank in, something desperate and ugly emerged from beneath his carefully maintained facade. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising to nearly a shout. "She's been in the hospital for weeks. She's on morphine, for Christ's sake. You can't seriously believe she's capable of running a construction company while she's dying of cancer." The room went dead silent again, but this time the silence had teeth. Marcus had just revealed exactly what he really thought about my diagnosis, my treatment, and my chances of survival. James Mitchell spoke first, his voice ice cold. "Marcus, your wife is not dying of cancer. She's recovering from successful treatment. And the only person in this room who seems incapable of making rational decisions is you. Furthermore," added board member Patricia Wells, who'd been Thomas's financial advisor for 15 years, "Elena just demonstrated a more thorough understanding of this company's operations than you've shown in 3 years of sitting in on meetings." Marcus turned to me, his mask completely off now. "You think you've won something here? You have no idea what you've just done to yourself. Running this company will kill you faster than the cancer ever could." The cruelty in his voice, the casual way he threw my illness in my face, crystallized something for everyone in that room. This wasn't a concerned husband worried about his wife's health. This was a man whose carefully laid plans had just exploded, and he was lashing out at the person who'd outmaneuvered him. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I have no idea what I've just done. I've never been the CEO of a $200 million company before. But I know what you've done. And now everyone else knows too." Claire stepped forward and placed a manila envelope on the table in front of Robert Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell, these are copies of all evidence we've discussed today, plus additional documentation of financial crimes that will be turned over to the Oregon State Attorney General's office this afternoon." Marcus's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about criminal fraud charges," Claire replied matter-of-factly. "Embezzlement of corporate funds, identity theft, forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The total amount of stolen funds exceeds $400,000, which makes this a felony case." The color drained from Marcus's face again, but this time it didn't come back. "Elena, you can't be serious. I'm your husband." "You were my husband," I corrected. "You filed for divorce while I was unconscious from surgery, remember?" Claire has already filed a response on my behalf, along with a countersuit for fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Margaret Sinclair, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting, looked up from her laptop. "Mr. Marcus, I've prepared your final employment termination documents. Security will escort you from the building once you've cleared out your office." "You can't fire me," Marcus said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is my family's company." "It was your grandfather's company," I replied. "He chose to leave it to someone else, someone he trusted to honor his legacy instead of pillaging it for personal gain." Robert Caldwell stood up. "Marcus, I think it's time for you to leave. This meeting is concluded." But Marcus wasn't ready to surrender. He stood up, bracing his hands on the conference table, and leaned toward me. "You think you're so smart, Elena? You think you can just waltz in here and take over? You have no idea how to run this business. You're going to drive it into the ground within 6 months." The room held its breath, waiting to see how I'd respond to what amounted to a public attack on my competence and qualifications. I stood up slowly, carefully managing my IV line, and walked around the conference table until I was standing directly in front of Marcus. When I spoke, my voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Marcus, for the past hour, you've argued that I'm too sick to make rational decisions, too medicated to understand complex information, and too unstable to be trusted with responsibility. But somehow, I managed to uncover your embezzlement scheme, document your fraud, assemble a legal team, conduct a forensic audit, and outmaneuver you completely while recovering from cancer surgery." I paused, letting that sink in. "So either I'm as incompetent as you claim, which would make you the man who got outsmarted by someone who's supposedly delusional and dying, or I'm exactly as capable as Thomas Blackwell believed when he chose me to lead his company." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Either way," I continued, "it doesn't reflect very well on you, does it?" The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Marcus finally broke. His shoulders sagged. His aggressive posture collapsed, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely defeated. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About the prenup, about Thomas's will, about the controlling interest. I've known about the legal documents since the day we signed them," I replied. "What I didn't know was that you'd never bothered to read them. What I didn't know was that you saw me as nothing more than a convenient accessory to your family's wealth. What I didn't know was that you'd try to steal everything the moment I became inconvenient." Marcus looked around the room at faces that had once respected him, that had once seen him as Thomas Blackwell's natural successor. Now they were looking at him like a stranger who'd betrayed their trust. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above, a whisper. "We could have worked together. We could have run this company as partners." "We could have," I agreed. "Right up until you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive." The meeting ended with Marcus being escorted from the building. By security, his access to all company systems revoked, and his corporate credit cards canceled. Within 2 hours, news of the leadership change had spread throughout the construction industry in Portland. By evening, I was back in my hospital bed, but everything had changed. I wasn't Elena the cancer patient anymore. I was Elena Morrison Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Construction, the woman who'd built a corporate empire from a hospital room while her husband tried to steal it out from under her. The phone on my bedside table rang constantly. Reporters, industry contacts, potential clients, and competitors all wanting to know how a woman receiving cancer treatment had managed to execute one of the most dramatic corporate takeovers in Oregon business history. But the call that mattered most came at 9 p.m. from Claire. "Elena, I thought you should know. Marcus's attorney contacted us an hour ago. He wants to negotiate a settlement." I smiled, feeling stronger than I had in months. "Tell him we're not interested in settlements. We're interested in justice." The war was over. Now came the reckoning. 6 weeks later, I walked out of Millfield General Hospital for the last time as a patient. The IV was gone. My hair was starting to grow back in silver-streaked wisps, and I was carrying discharge papers that showed complete remission. But more importantly, I was carrying the keys to the executive floor of Blackwell Construction and a leather portfolio containing the signed agreements that had just restructured Marcus's entire existence. The criminal trial had lasted 3 weeks. Marcus, represented by a public defender after his assets were frozen, had tried to paint himself as a devoted husband whose only crime was loving his wife too much to burden her with business decisions during her illness. The jury saw through that fiction in less than 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty on 7 counts of embezzlement. Guilty on 4 counts of fraud. Guilty on 2 counts of identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months if he made full restitution to the company and to me personally. But the criminal case was just the opening act. The civil proceedings were where real justice lived. Claire had assembled a legal team that treated Marcus's financial destruction like a precision surgery. Every asset he'd hidden, every account he'd thought was safe, every investment he'd made, with stolen money, all of it traced, documented, and reclaimed. The private investigator he'd hired, Jake Morrison, had actually provided some of our best evidence when Claire offered him immunity in exchange for his complete files on Marcus's activities. Vivian Torres, the girlfriend who'd been living in our house and spending company money, discovered that love became much more complicated when it came with federal fraud charges. She'd flipped on Marcus within days of being contacted by prosecutors, providing detailed testimony about his plans to have me declared incompetent while he cleaned out every account we'd ever shared. The house in Millfield Heights, the Tudor style mansion that had once represented everything I thought I wanted, was sold at auction. Marcus received exactly nothing from the sale after legal fees and restitution were deducted. The proceeds helped fund the new employee wellness program I'd established at Blackwell Construction, specifically focused on supporting workers facing serious health challenges. The divorce proceedings were concluded in a single afternoon. With the prenup clearly establishing separate property and Marcus's criminal conviction eliminating any claim to spousal support, the only remaining question was who would keep the wedding rings. I let him have them. They seemed more appropriate, as symbols of his new circumstances than mine. But the resolution that mattered most came on a Thursday morning in October, when I walked into the Blackwell Construction headquarters as its permanent CEO. Not the interim leader managing a crisis, not the cancer patient trying to protect her interests, but the person Thomas Blackwell had trained for this role, finally ready to claim it fully. The company had thrived during the transition. Without Marcus's embezzlement draining resources, and his poor decision-making creating costly mistakes, we'd posted our highest quarterly profits in company history. The Peterson Group had not only renewed their $50 million contract, but had referred 3 additional clients who'd heard about our new leadership. Margaret Sinclair had prepared my office, Thomas's old office, with the same attention to detail she'd brought to everything else. His desk remained, but she'd added a comfortable seating area where I could take meetings without the intimidation factor of sitting behind a massive mahogany barrier. The wall that had once displayed Thomas's awards and certifications now showed a mix of his achievements and mine, including the framed letter he'd written to me 3 months before his death. Elena, the letter read, "Leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them faster than your competitors do. You've already learned lessons that Marcus may never understand. Trust your instincts, honor our employees, and remember that the strongest structures are built with both steel and flexibility. The company is in better hands with you than it ever would have been with blood inheritance alone." The phone call I'd been expecting came at 2:30 p.m. It was from Columbia River Correctional Institution, where Marcus was serving his sentence. "Elena, it's me." His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, diminished by circumstance and consequence. "Hello. Marcus, how are you adjusting?" There was a long pause. I wanted to apologize. Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I'm hoping for early parole, because I finally understand what I did to you. I sat back in Thomas's chair, my chair, and looked out the window at the Portland skyline. "What do you understand, Marcus?" "I understand that I never saw you as an equal partner. I saw you as an asset I could manage and control. When you got sick, I saw it as an opportunity instead of a tragedy. I convinced myself I was protecting the company, but really, I was just protecting my own ego from the truth that you were always better at this than I was. The admission hung in the air between us, carried by a prison phone system that recorded every word. I also understand, he continued, that you could have destroyed me quietly. You could have had me arrested without the public humiliation, settled, out of court, kept everything private. But you chose to make it public because other people needed to see what financial abuse looks like. He was right. I could have handled everything behind closed doors, protected the Blackwell family reputation, minimized the scandal. Instead, I'd let every newspaper, every trade publication, every business blog tell the story of how a woman recovering from cancer had exposed her husband's fraud and reclaimed control of her life. Marcus, do you know why I made it public? Tell me. Because somewhere out there is another woman whose husband thinks her illness makes her vulnerable. Another person whose family thinks medical treatment makes them incompetent. Another spouse who's being robbed blind while they're fighting for their life. They needed to see that it's possible to fight back and win. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Marcus spoke again. For what it's worth, Elena, Thomas was right to choose you. You're going to do incredible things with that company. I already am, I replied. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing architectural plans for our next major project, a medical center complex specifically designed for cancer treatment and recovery. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was designing better facilities for future patients like myself, using the company I'd reclaimed from the man who'd tried to steal it while I was receiving treatment. At 6 p.m., Claire knocked on my office door. Elena, there's someone here to see you. She stepped aside to reveal Janet, the oncology nurse who'd been one of the first to notice that Marcus's behavior wasn't normal for a worried spouse. Mrs. Morrison Blackwell, Janet said, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to tell you that your story has changed things at the hospital. We've started training programs to help staff recognize signs of financial abuse among patients. You probably saved more lives than you realize. As Janet left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd reclaimed and everything I'd built. The company was mine, the future was mine, and the legacy Thomas had entrusted to me was finally in the right hands. Marcus had tried to erase me while I was at my weakest. Instead, he'd simply revealed how strong I'd always been. The cancer might have challenged my body, but it had forged my resolve into something unbreakable. The resolution was complete. Now came the really interesting part, building something even better than what had almost been stolen. 2 years have passed since I walked out of that hospital room and into the rest of my life. As I sit in my office this morning reading reports about Blackwell Construction's latest acquisition, a sustainable housing development that will provide affordable homes for low-income families, I barely recognize the woman who once lay in a hospital bed, wondering if her husband's love had ever been real. The answer, by the way, is still complicated. I've come to understand that Marcus probably did love me, in the limited way that someone loves a possession they value. He loved having a wife who made him look good at charity events, who contributed to his family's business success, who reflected well on his status in the community. What he couldn't do was love me as an equal, as a partner, or as someone whose worth existed independent of what I could provide for him. Cancer, it turns out, has a way of clarifying relationships. It strips away all the social pretense and reveals what people are really made of. Some people rise to meet the challenge with you. Others see it as an opportunity to take advantage while you're vulnerable. Marcus chose the latter, and in doing so, he revealed not just his own character, but also mine. The woman who discovered her husband's betrayal while recovering from surgery was someone I'd never met before. She was harder than the Elena who'd trusted blindly, smarter than the Elena who'd accepted surface explanations, and infinitely more dangerous than the Elena who'd played supporting roles in other people's stories. Cancer didn't make me weak. It burned away everything that wasn't essential, leaving only the core of who I really was. Thomas Blackwell used to say that the construction business was really about understanding pressure, how much weight a structure could bear, where the stress points were, and how to build something that could withstand forces that would destroy weaker designs. I understand now that he wasn't just talking about buildings. He was talking about people, about relationships, about the careful architecture of a life built to last. The company has grown beyond anything Thomas could have imagined. We've expanded into sustainable construction, pioneering techniques that reduce environmental impact while creating healthier living spaces. We've developed partnerships with medical facilities to design treatment centers that prioritize patient dignity and family support. We've established scholarship programs for children whose parents are receiving cancer treatment, understanding that illness affects entire families, not just individual patients. But the project I'm most proud of isn't a building at all. It's the Elena Morrison Blackwell Foundation for Financial Protection, which provides legal assistance to people facing medical crises who discover that their families or spouses are taking advantage of their vulnerability. We've helped 43 individuals in the past 18 months, representing them in court, connecting them with forensic accountants, and ensuring that their medical treatment doesn't become an opportunity for financial predators. The Foundation's first case was a 70-year-old man whose son had been systematically draining his accounts while he underwent dialysis treatment. The second was a young mother whose husband had filed for divorce and custody of their children the day after her breast cancer diagnosis. Each case reminded me that Marcus's betrayal wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern of opportunistic cruelty that happens more often than anyone wants to acknowledge. What I've learned is that recovery isn't just about surviving illness or overcoming betrayal. It's about integrating those experiences into something stronger and more purposeful than what existed before. The Elena who walked into that hospital for cancer treatment was successful and comfortable, but she was also naive about human nature and dependent on other people's validation. The Elena who emerged was self-reliant, strategically minded, and absolutely clear about her own worth. I still see Dr. Sarah Kim for regular checkups, not for cancer surveillance, which shows continued remission, but for the kind of psychological maintenance that comes with surviving trauma and rebuilding identity. She asked me recently whether I thought I would have discovered my own strength if Marcus hadn't betrayed me. It's a question I think about often. Would I have been content to remain in a supporting role, contributing to Thomas's legacy without ever fully claiming my own power? Would I have continued accepting Marcus's diminishing view of my capabilities, gradually shrinking to fit his expectations? Would I have spent my entire life being strong for other people without ever being strong for myself? I think the answer is probably yes. Comfortable circumstances don't usually force personal growth. It takes pressure, crisis, and sometimes betrayal to reveal what we're really capable of becoming. The hardest part of this entire experience wasn't the cancer, the chemotherapy, or even discovering my husband's plans to destroy me financially. The hardest part was accepting that I had been complicit in my own diminishment. I had allowed Marcus to handle our finances because it was easier than staying involved. I had stepped back from active leadership at the company because maintaining peace seemed more important than asserting authority. I had accepted his characterization of my work as secondary because confrontation felt more exhausting than accommodation. Marcus didn't steal my power. I had been giving it away, piece by piece, year by year, until there was so little left that he thought taking the rest would be easy. The lesson I want to share with anyone facing their own version of this story is simple. Your vulnerability is not an invitation for others to take advantage of you. Your illness is not a permission slip for someone else to make decisions about your life. Your need for support does not obligate you to accept mistreatment disguised as care. More importantly, your strength doesn't disappear just because your circumstances become difficult. If anything, crisis has a way of revealing capabilities you didn't know you possessed. The same intelligence that got you through college can navigate legal proceedings. The same determination that built your career can rebuild your life. The same instincts that made you successful in one area can be applied to challenges you've never faced before. I receive emails regularly from people who've read about my story in business publications or legal journals. They tell me about their own situations, spouses who've tried to exploit medical emergencies, family members who've attempted to seize control during vulnerable periods, partners who've confused temporary incapacity with permanent incompetence. What I tell them is what I wish someone had told me during those dark days in the hospital. You are not as helpless as you feel. You are not as alone as you think. And you are absolutely not obligated to make other people's betrayal easier by staying quiet about it. The woman lying in that hospital bed 2 years ago, wondering if her marriage had ever been real, couldn't have imagined the life I'm living now. She couldn't have pictured herself running a multi-million-dollar company, establishing a foundation that protects vulnerable patients, or speaking at conferences about financial abuse and recovery strategies. But she was always capable of becoming this person. The strength was always there, waiting for circumstances that would require her to use it. If you're facing your own hospital room moment, your own discovery of betrayal, your own realization that someone you trusted has been working against your interests, remember this: you are more resilient than you know, more capable than you've been allowed to believe, and more worthy of protection and justice than anyone who would exploit your vulnerability wants you to understand. Your story doesn't end with their betrayal. It begins with your decision to fight back. And trust me on this, you're going to be amazed by what you're capable of once you decide to stop making other people's bad behavior easier and start making your own good decisions possible. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had during your darkest moments? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.